All right, so let's fire up those nostalgia engines, I guess, because today we're taking a deep dive into the world of the 1995 movie Hackers.
Oh, yeah.
Um, you might remember it for its cyberpunk aesthetic,
Yeah.
or maybe you remember it for that iconic line, "Hack the Planet."
Right.
But what's really fascinating is how this movie, which wasn't a box office hit when it first came out,
Mhm.
ended up predicting future tech trends and actually influencing everything from hacker culture
Yeah.
to music.
What's interesting about Hackers is it kind of arrived at this time when the internet was this very mysterious new frontier
Yes.
to most people.
Totally.
And by blending that mystery with that kind of like teenage rebellion
Yeah.
and this visually stunning, though not always accurate, portrayal of hacking,
Right.
it really captured the public imagination.
Yeah. Okay. So for those who haven't seen it, or maybe just need a quick refresher,
Uh,
Hackers follows Dade Zero Cool Murphy, who's played by a young Johnny Lee Miller.
oh, yeah.
Dade gets wrongfully accused of unleashing a dangerous computer virus, and he teams up with this awesome hacker,
Right.
Kate Acid Burn Libby, played by Angelina Jolie,
Uh-huh.
to clear his name
Yeah.
and to expose a corporate conspiracy.
The chemistry between Miller and Jolie is electric
Oh, yeah.
on screen. And fun fact, they actually ended up getting married in real life shortly after the film.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah,
It makes you wonder how much of that on-screen banter was just them
right.
being themselves, right?
Exactly.
And speaking of the cast, we can't forget the other memorable supporting characters
Yeah.
like Phantom Freak, Serial Killer, and Lord Nikon.
Yeah.
They all have these distinct personalities and hacking styles that just add so much to the film's energy.
It's almost like a hacker version of The Breakfast Club.
Totally. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that really stands out about Hackers is its visual style.
Oh, yeah.
That neon 3D grid that represents cyberspace
Yeah.
is so iconic, even if it's completely unrealistic.
I know. I remember being so mesmerized by those visuals as a kid. It
Yeah.
made hacking seem like this super cool,
Yeah.
almost magical activity.
Right, and that was the point.
Yeah.
The filmmakers weren't going for realism. They
Ooh.
wanted to capture the excitement, the sense of adventure
Right.
that came with exploring this new digital world.
Yes.
And at a time when most people had no idea what hacking even looked like,
Right.
those visuals provided a visual language that was both captivating and influential.
Absolutely. And speaking of influential, we can't talk about Hackers without mentioning that killer soundtrack.
Yeah.
It's like a who's who of early 90s electronic music
Hmm.
with artists like Orbital, Prodigy, and Underworld.
The soundtrack is more than just a collection of cool songs. It's an entire soundscape
Yeah.
that perfectly complements the film's futuristic and rebellious vibe.
Yeah.
And it actually had a real impact on music trends,
Wow.
bringing underground electronic music into the mainstream. You could argue that it helped to pave the way for the rise of rave culture and the fashion associated with it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
It's amazing to think that a movie soundtrack could have that much cultural influence.
it really is.
But Hackers wasn't just about the cool visuals and music. It also explored some pretty profound themes.
Mhm.
And some of them are even more relevant today than they were back in 95.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The film had a really strong anti-corporate message running through it.
Yeah.
You got the villain, the plague, this power-hungry executive who was willing to do anything to protect his company's profits.
Right.
And then you have the hackers who are portrayed as these like Robin Hood-esque figures fighting for freedom of information and exposing corruption.
And that whole idea of corporate control over information,
Yeah,
surveillance, privacy, it's like they were tapping into anxieties that would become
right.
major societal concerns in the years to come.
Exactly. Hackers presented a vision of hacking as a form of rebellion against those forces. And that resonated with a lot of people, especially those who felt increasingly uneasy about the growing power of corporations and technology.
So they got the visuals and the themes, right?
Uh-huh.
But how accurate was the actual hacking in the movie?
Right.
I mean, do they have real hackers consulting on the film?
They did, but it was a bit of a balancing act.
Okay.
They consulted with real hackers to make sure the technical details had
Mhm.
some grounding in reality,
Right.
but they were careful not to reveal any actual hacking methods
Oh, okay.
that could be used for illegal activities.
So they were trying to strike a balance between authenticity
Exactly.
and responsibility.
Yeah, they even collaborated with the FBI
Wow.
to avoid accidentally encouraging cybercrime.
That makes sense. You want to capture the essence of hacking without turning the movie into a how-to guide for aspiring cyber criminals.
Precisely. And while they avoided revealing any real hacking secrets,
No.
they did manage to accurately portray certain techniques like social engineering, which involves manipulating people to gain access to systems.
Right.
That was actually ahead of its time, as social engineering techniques like phishing would become major cybersecurity threats in the years to come.
So even though hackers took some creative liberties with the technical aspects,
Yeah.
it still managed to foreshadow some real-world cybersecurity issues.
And it's worth pointing out that the film's 3D visualization of cyberspace,
Right.
while visually stunning, is pure fiction.
Yeah.
Real hacking is much less glamorous,
Right.
involving lines of code, data analysis, and a lot of patience.
So you're saying it's not all neon grids and virtual reality interfaces?
Not quite, but
Yeah.
but hey, the film's goal was to entertain and inspire,
Yeah.
and it definitely achieved that.
Speaking of entertainment, we can't forget about some of the most memorable moments from the film,
Uh-huh.
like the iconic Hack the Planet rallying cry.
That line became an instant classic.
I know.
It perfectly encapsulated the film's rebellious spirit. And this idea that young people, armed with their tech skills,
Yeah.
could challenge the status quo.
And who can forget that scene where they hack into a TV station and start messing with the programming?
Right.
It was pure chaos, but also incredibly entertaining.
It perfectly showcased the film's playful anarchy and technological prowess, even if it was a bit over the top.
Speaking of over the top, we have to talk about the villain, the
Oh,
Plague.
yeah.
He's like this caricature of corporate greed and arrogance, riding around his office on a skateboard
Yeah.
and constantly underestimating the hackers.
He's brilliantly played by Fisher Stevens,
I agree.
and he adds so much to the film's campy feel.
Yes.
His disdain for the hackers and his attempts to frame them as like cyber terrorists
Uh-huh.
really drive the conflict.
And that final showdown where hackers from all over the world unite to take him down
Right.
is just epic.
It's a classic David versus Goliath story.
Yeah.
Only this time the slingshot is a keyboard.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, diving into the plot, the characters, visuals, music,
Right.
even some of the technical aspects of hackers.
Uh-huh.
But what about its lasting impact?
Yeah.
How did this film, which wasn't even a huge hit when it came out, become such a cult classic
Right.
and influence hacker culture in such a profound way? We'll get into all of that right after a quick word from our sponsor.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of hackers. Before the break, we were talking about the visual style of hackers and that memorable Hack the Planet scene.
Yeah.
Now it's time to shift gears a bit and talk about the lasting impact of this film.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting because Hackers wasn't exactly a blockbuster when it was released.
Yeah, you're right. It received mixed reviews from critics and didn't do that well at the box office initially.
Right.
So why has it become this beloved cult classic
Right.
with such a devoted following? What happened?
I think nostalgia plays a big part.
Uh-huh.
For many people who grew up in the 90s,
Right.
Hackers is like this time capsule of that era. It captures everything from the fashion and music to the early days of the internet and that distinctive countercultural vibe.
It's like a window into a time when the internet felt full of possibilities.
Yes.
Both exciting and a bit dangerous.
Right.
And even though the technology in the film is pretty dated now,
Mm-hmm.
the themes it explores feel even more relevant today than they did back then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Okay.
We live in a world where data is currency.
Right.
Corporations have immense power,
Well,
and concerns about privacy and surveillance are constantly in the news.
yes.
Hackers tapped into those anxieties that were just emerging in the mid-90s,
Yeah.
and presented hacking as this form of resistance
Right.
against these powerful forces.
So you could say that Hackers was ahead of its time in a way.
Absolutely. It spoke to a growing unease about the role of technology in our lives
Yeah.
and the potential consequences of unchecked corporate power.
Right.
It also gave a voice to those who felt marginalized or overlooked in the face of these massive technological and societal shifts.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
It's like Hackers provided a platform for a generation that was grappling with these new realities
Mm-hmm.
and presented hacking as a way to fight back.
Exactly. And it's important to note that Hackers didn't just portray hacking as a technical skill.
Uh-huh.
It showed it as a form of self-expression,
Yes.
a way to challenge the status quo even a form of art in a way.
It's like they were saying, hey, you can use your tech skills to make a statement
Right.
to fight for what you believe in.
Exactly.
Now, we've talked about how hackers foresaw some of the cybersecurity issues that we face today, but what about its impact on hacker culture itself?
That's a huge part of the film's legacy. You have to
Yeah.
remember that before hackers,
Yeah.
hacking was often portrayed in the media as this malicious criminal activity.
Yeah, you're right. It had this negative connotation, like hacking was something only criminals did.
Exactly. Hackers flipped that narrative on its head. It showed hackers as these like young, rebellious individuals who, while sometimes mischievous,
Right.
were ultimately well-intentioned.
Yes.
They were fighting for what they believed in, exposing corruption and challenging those in power.
It's like they became the digital Robin Hoods of the 90s.
Precisely. And that romanticized view of hacking, that idea of using your skills for good,
Yeah.
really resonated with a lot of people. It attracted a new generation to the world of hacking.
Right.
And helped foster a sense of community among those who were already involved.
It's fascinating how a single film could have such a profound impact on an entire subculture.
And it's not just about the image of hacking.
Right.
Hackers also raised awareness about the importance of cybersecurity, even if unintentionally, by showing the potential consequences of hacking, both good and bad. It got people thinking about the need to protect information.
Right.
And to be more aware of online security.
So even though the film wasn't always accurate in its depiction of hacking, it sparked conversations about cybersecurity and got people thinking about these issues in a way they hadn't before.
Absolutely. And that's a testament to the film's enduring legacy. Over 25 years later, we're still talking about its themes, its cultural significance, and its impact on how we perceive the world of hacking.
I'm curious, what do you think is the main reason Hackers continues to resonate with audiences today?
Well, nostalgia definitely plays a part. I believe Hackers taps into this deeper yearning for freedom and this desire to challenge authority. It speaks to that part of us that believes in the power of technology to affect change and empower individuals.
That makes a lot of sense in today's world where we're bombarded with information and face growing concerns about privacy and control. Those themes are arguably even more relevant now than they were back in the 90s.
Hackers reminds us that we have a choice in how we engage with technology and that we can use our skills to fight for what we believe in, to make our voices heard, and to shape the future of the digital world.
So in essence, Hackers is more than just a fun, stylish movie.
Right.
It's a film that challenged conventions, sparked important conversations, and continues to inspire people to think differently about technology. And its impact on society.
You've hit the nail on the head, and it did all of that while delivering a captivating story with memorable characters, a killer soundtrack, and a groundbreaking visual.
Thinking of those visuals, the film's depiction of cyberspace, while visually captivating, was obviously pure science fiction. I wonder, given how much technology has advanced since 1995, how might those visuals be reimagined for a modern audience? What would a contemporary version of Hackers look like?
Yeah, that's a great question to ponder. If Hackers were made today, how would they visualize cyberspace? Would it be a hyper-realistic metaverse or maybe something even more abstract and mind-bending?
It really makes you think about how far technology has come since the dial-up modem days.
It's fascinating to consider how the visual language of hacking would evolve in a modern adaptation. But beyond just the aesthetics, I think the real challenge would be capturing the essence of hacking. In today's complex digital landscape, I mean, the internet has evolved so much since 1995. And the stakes are much higher.
Back then, it felt like the internet was this wild west, like a new frontier, where anything was possible. There was this sense of optimism and the belief that technology could be used to empower individuals and level the playing field. Do you think that spirit is still alive today?
I think that spirit is definitely still alive, but it's certainly more complicated now. You know, in the early days of the internet, there was this sense of freedom and possibility. But as technology has become more integrated into every aspect of our lives, the lines between the physical and digital worlds have blurred. And the consequences of our actions online have become much more real.
We've seen the rise of mass surveillance, data breaches, cyber warfare, the spread of misinformation. It's almost like the reality of the internet has caught up with
Yeah.
And maybe even surpass the dystopian visions of some cyberpunk fiction.
It's a bit ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hackers presented this somewhat romanticized view of hacking as this tool for rebellion and social change.
Right.
But in today's world, that line between hackers as heroes and villains has become much less clear.
Yeah, you're right. We have hacktivist groups like Anonymous
Right.
who are using their skills to expose corruption and fight for social justice. But we also have state-sponsored hackers engaging in cyber espionage.
Right.
And criminal organizations using ransomware to extort businesses and individuals.
Yeah, it seems like the landscape has shifted dramatically.
So where does that leave us? Is the idea of hacking for good, that spirit of using your skills to make a positive impact, still a valid concept in this new landscape?
I believe it is.
Okay.
But it requires a much more nuanced understanding of the ethical implications of our actions online.
Right.
It's not just about technical skills anymore.
Okay.
It's about using those skills responsibly, respecting privacy, and being mindful of the potential consequences of our actions in this hyper-connected world.
It seems like ethical hacking has become more important than ever.
Exactly, and I think it also involves recognizing that hacking is no longer solely about breaking into systems. It's about understanding how technology impacts society, how power dynamics play out online, and how we can use our voices and expertise to advocate for a more just and equitable digital world.
So what can our listeners do if they're inspired by the ideas in hackers and want to use their tech skills to make a difference?
Oh, there are so many ways to get involved and make a positive impact.
Yeah.
You could start by learning more about cybersecurity and ethical hacking practices. There are tons of online resources and communities dedicated to these topics.
Right.
You could also support organizations that are fighting for digital rights and privacy.
And maybe, just maybe, you can channel a little bit of that hack the planet energy in a way that is both responsible and impactful.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Remember, hacking, in its truest sense, is about pushing boundaries, challenging assumptions, and finding creative solutions to complex problems. And those skills are more important now than ever.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into the world of hackers.
Yeah.
We've explored the film's plot, characters, visuals, music, its lasting impact on hacker culture, and even how its themes resonate in today's digital world.
It's been a fascinating journey back to 1995 and a thought-provoking exploration of how the world of hacking has evolved.
If you haven't seen Hackers yet, or maybe it's been a while, we highly recommend checking it out. It's a fun, visually engaging film that provides a glimpse into the early days of the internet, while also raising timeless questions about technology, society, and the power of individuals to make a difference.
And even though the technology in the film is dated, the themes it explores are more relevant now than ever.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep hacking the planet, but responsibly, of course.